My name is Daniel Hargrove, and for 11 years I've owned 42 acres of ranch land on the outskirts of Comfort County. It's not a big spread by Texas standards, but it's mine. My grandfather bought the land in the 60s. My father ran cattle on it for 30 years, and when he passed, it came to me. I run a small horse boarding operation now, along with a handful of Angus cattle, and I share a single gravel access road with 6 other properties, including the newer development that sprang up 2 years ago called Meadowbrook Estates. That's where Deborah Simmons lives. And Deborah Simmons is the reason I'm sitting here telling you this story. If you've never dealt with someone like Deborah, let me paint the picture. She moved into Meadowbrook when it was built, got herself elected president of the Homeowners Association within 8 months, and from that point forward, she decided that the entire access road, including the half-mile stretch that crosses my property and leads to my ranch gate, was somehow under her jurisdiction. It isn't. I have a recorded easement agreement going back to 1987 that clearly states the shared road belongs to all 7 properties, with maintenance costs split proportionally, and with my family holding the original right-of-way deed since the road was carved out of our land in the first place. My gate, the one that opens onto my own property, has never been HOA property. It's never even been close to HOA property. But try telling that to someone who believes a laminated newsletter gives her the authority of a county judge. It started small, the way these things always do. Deborah began sending emails about unauthorized livestock trailers using the shared road, even though hauling feed and stock is literally the entire reason that road exists. Then it was complaints about the sound of my rooster at 5 in the morning, despite the fact that my property is zoned agricultural and roosters are, generally speaking, allowed to be roosters. Then came the anonymous notes zip-tied to my mailbox about property values and community standards, even though my ranch predates her subdivision by nearly 4 decades. I tried to be reasonable. I really did. I attended 2 HOA meetings, even though I wasn't a member and wasn't required to be, just to clear the air. I brought copies of my easement documents. I explained, calmly, that my gate and my road frontage were not governed by her association's covenants. She smiled at me both times, thanked me for coming, and then continued sending the same complaints the following week as if the meeting had never happened. Somewhere around February, I started keeping a small notebook in my truck, just to track the complaints, because they were coming so frequently I couldn't keep them straight anymore. Monday, it was a note about my dog barking, even though my dog is a 13-year-old blue heeler who sleeps 20 hours a day. Wednesday, it was a complaint about my hay delivery truck damaging community aesthetics, despite the fact that the truck never once left the gravel road. By the end of February, I had 11 separate incidents logged, none of which involved anything remotely resembling an actual violation of anything. I even tried, one Saturday morning, to have a genuinely friendly conversation with Deborah at the mailbox cluster where our 2 properties' mail routes intersect. I brought her a jar of honey from my neighbor's hives, told her I understood that a new subdivision moving in next to an old working ranch could take some adjusting to, and asked if we could find a way to coexist without the constant back and forth. She took the honey, smiled, and told me that coexisting meant I needed to bring my property up to community standards. When I asked her, genuinely curious, what standard she was referring to, since my land wasn't part of her HOA and never had been, she simply said, "Standards are standards, Daniel," turned around, and walked back into her house. I stood there at the mailboxes for a solid minute, honestly unsure whether I'd just had a conversation or been dismissed by royalty. Things escalated in March, when Deborah petitioned the HOA board, a board she'd handpicked with 2 of her closest friends, to pass a resolution demanding that all non-member vehicles, meaning my truck, my horse trailer, and my farrier's van, obtain a permit sticker before using the shared road. When I refused to apply for a permit to use a road my family had maintained since before her subdivision existed, she took it a step further. In April, I came home from a supply run to find a padlock and chain looped through my ranch gate. Not the HOA's gate. Not a gate on HOA property. My gate. The one my grandfather welded by hand in 1971. Attached to the chain was a laminated notice from the Meadowbrook Estates Architectural and Access Committee informing me that due to repeated violations of community access policy, my gate would remain locked until I appeared before the board to resolve outstanding compliance issues. I stood there in my driveway, in the fading evening light, staring at a padlock on my own gate, and I felt something between disbelief and fury settle into my chest. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was trespassing. This was Deborah Simmons physically obstructing access to my own ranch, on my own property, without a shred of legal authority to do so. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I didn't cut that chain in anger. I didn't confront Deborah on her porch. I didn't post a rant on the neighborhood Facebook page, tempting as that was. Instead, I went inside, I made a pot of coffee, and I called my attorney, a woman named Renata Cole who had handled my father's estate and who I trusted more than almost anyone. I photographed the padlock, the chain, the laminated notice, the gate itself, and the surrounding fence line, all with timestamps. Then I called the Comfort County Sheriff's Office non-emergency line to file a report, because a locked gate blocking my only access to my own home and livestock was, at minimum, an obstruction issue, and potentially a criminal trespassing and vandalism matter. The deputy who came out that evening was a soft-spoken older man named Deputy Alvarez. He walked the fence line with me, took his own photos, and shook his head slowly at the padlock. "This is your gate," he said. It wasn't really a question. "Built by my grandfather in 1971, I told him. "This isn't HOA land. It's never been HOA land." He wrote up an incident report, cut the padlock himself with a set of bolt cutters from his cruiser, and handed me the broken lock in a small evidence bag in case you want to press charges down the line. Before he left, he gave me a piece of advice I've never forgotten. "Mr. Hargrove, homeowners associations love to act like little governments. But they're not. They've got zero jurisdiction outside what's written in their own covenants, and even less outside their own property lines. If she does this again, you call us again, and we'll keep documenting it. Eventually paper trails like this end up somewhere that matters." He was more right than either of us realized that night. 2 days later, Deborah did it again. New padlock, heavier chain, and this time a printed letter, not laminated, just paper, like she was in a hurry, declaring that my continued non-compliance left the board no choice but to escalate to a permanent access restriction, effective immediately, until I paid what she called back road maintenance dues of $4,000, a number she'd apparently pulled entirely out of thin air. Since I'd never been a dues-paying member of her association and had no obligation to be one. This time, I didn't call the sheriff first. I called Renata. "Daniel," she said, after I read her the letter over the phone, "I want you to do exactly 3 things. Document everything, the way you already have been. Do not remove this lock yourself. And give me 48 hours before you do anything else." I trusted her, so I waited. I boarded my horses at a neighbor's place 2 miles down the county road for those 2 days, hauling feed and water in through a gap in my back fence line that I use for equipment access, which was inconvenient but manageable. What I didn't know was that Renata wasn't just drafting a cease and desist letter. She was doing something far more effective. She was pulling every recorded document tied to that road, cross-referencing them with the county's GIS mapping system, and reaching out to someone she'd worked with for years in the Comfort County Development Services office. See, here's something most people don't realize about shared access roads like mine, especially ones that predate a modern subdivision. When Meadowbrook Estates was built, the developer was required, by county code, to file a road maintenance agreement and access easement disclosure with the county as part of the platting process. That means the county doesn't just have a casual interest in who controls that road. They have a legal, recorded stake in making sure that road remains passable, because it's designated in county records as an emergency vehicle access route, since it's the only route in or out for 7 properties, including mine, in the event of grass fire, flooding, or medical emergency. Renata found something in that filing that Deborah Simmons clearly never bothered to read. Buried in the original platting documents was a clause, standard for rural subdivisions like this one, stating that the shared access road must remain unobstructed and available for emergency ingress and egress at all times, and that any obstruction, gates, chains, locks, barriers of any kind placed across the roadway or across a property owner's private access point connected to that roadway, constituted a violation not just of county code, but of the conditions under which Meadowbrook's development permit had been issued in the first place. In other words, Deborah hadn't just been harassing me. She'd been putting her entire subdivision's development permit at risk, and she had no idea. Renata called me the evening she found the clause, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice even over the phone. "Daniel, I've been doing this kind of work for almost 20 years, and every so often you find a document that just settles the whole thing. This is one of those documents." Deborah built her entire argument on the assumption that nobody would ever actually read the platting file. Somebody finally did. She explained that county development permits for subdivisions like Meadowbrook are rarely revisited once construction is finished, which is exactly why Deborah had felt free to act as though the rules simply didn't apply to her. Permits get filed, inspections get signed off, and then the paperwork sits in a records office gathering dust for years, sometimes decades, until something forces a second look. A locked gate blocking emergency access was exactly the kind of thing that forced a second look. Renata filed a formal complaint with Development Services, attached my documented history with the Sheriff's Office, my 2 incident reports, my photographs, and my copy of the original 1987 easement deed. She also sent a certified letter directly to the HOA board, not just to Deborah, informing them that continued obstruction of the roadway could result in a county compliance review of Meadowbrook's development permit, and that individual board members could be held personally liable for damages resulting from denied emergency access, should anything happen to my property or my neighbors while the road was blocked. I didn't know any of this had happened yet. All I knew was that on a Thursday evening, my phone rang, and it was Renata. "Daniel," she said, "I need you to be up before sunrise tomorrow. Comfort County Code Enforcement is sending an inspector out to your road first thing in the morning, along with someone from the fire marshal's office. I'd suggest you're there to meet them." "Before sunrise?" I asked. "They want to see the obstruction in its current state, before anyone has a chance to remove it," she said. "Trust me. Be there." I barely slept that night. I kept thinking about my grandfather welding that gate together, about my father driving cattle through it for 3 decades, and about a woman who had lived in this county for less than 2 years deciding she had the right to seal it shut with a padlock and a laminated threat. At 5:45 the next morning, before the sun had even begun to color the sky, I walked out to my gate with a thermos of coffee and waited. The chain was still there, heavier than the last one, wrapped twice around the gate post with a fresh padlock gleaming faintly in the porch light behind me. At 6:10, headlights swept up the gravel road. 2 vehicles. A white county truck with the Comfort County Development Services emblem on the door, and behind it, a fire marshal's SUV. A woman climbed out of the first truck with a clipboard and a tape measure, introduced herself as Inspector Whitfield, and got straight to work photographing the chain, the padlock, the fence line, and the road width on either side of the obstruction. The fire marshal, a broad-shouldered man named Captain Reyes, walked the length of the road with a device that looked like a laser rangefinder, measuring clearance and noting something on a tablet. "This road is classified as an emergency access route," Captain Reyes told me, not unkindly. "Any obstruction across it, even one on private property that restricts a designated access point, is a direct violation of the fire code adopted into this county subdivision ordinance. This isn't a gray area." By the time they'd finished documenting everything, the sun was just beginning to rise over the tree line, and that's when I saw Deborah Simmons come power walking down the road in her robe and slippers, clearly having spotted the county vehicles from her kitchen window. "What is this?" she demanded, marching up with the kind of confidence that comes from never once being told no. "This is a private community matter. You people have no business out here." Inspector Whitfield turned to her, calm as still water. Are you the individual responsible for placing this chain and lock across this access point?" Deborah hesitated, clearly recalculating in real time. "I'm the president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and this road falls under our—" "This particular gate is on Mr. Hargrove's private property," Inspector Whitfield interrupted, glancing at her clipboard. "According to the recorded easement and the county plat filed at the time of your subdivision's development, this road is a designated emergency access corridor serving 7 separate properties. Obstructing it, especially at a point that restricts access to a private residence, is a violation of County Code Section 14, and it's also a direct violation of the conditions under which your subdivision's development permit was originally approved." Deborah's face went through several colors in quick succession. "That road maintenance is our responsibility. We have every right to regulate." "You have the right to regulate maintenance costs and usage agreements among consenting association members," Whitfield said. "You do not have the right to physically block a property owner's access to his own land, especially not on a road with active emergency access designation. This chain needs to come off this gate immediately, and I'll be filing a formal notice of violation with your board today." Captain Reyes stepped in at that point, holding up his tablet. "I want to be very direct with you. If there were a grass fire on this ridge, or if Mr. Hargrove or one of his neighbors needed an ambulance and this road was obstructed, that's not just a civil matter anymore. That becomes a criminal liability question, and it lands on whoever placed the obstruction." "I was protecting community assets," Deborah said, her voice rising a notch, though the confidence behind it had clearly started to crack. "Nobody asked him if his cattle trucks could just come through here whenever they please." Inspector Whitfield said, flipping to a page on her clipboard. The recorded easement predates your subdivision by nearly 40 years. Mr. Hargrove's family has held right-of-way access since 1987, and this road was built, in part, on land his family originally owned. There's nothing here to protect him from. If anything, the obligation runs the other direction. By this point, a couple of Deborah's own neighbors had wandered out onto their porches, drawn by the flashing amber lights on the county trucks. I noticed Tom, my neighbor down the road, standing near his fence line with his arms crossed, watching the whole exchange with an expression that told me he'd been waiting a long time to see this particular conversation happen. Another woman, someone I didn't recognize, stood at the edge of her driveway in a bathrobe, phone raised, quietly recording the whole thing, which I'd later learn was Wanda Price, the same woman who would become HOA President within a matter of weeks. I have never in my life seen someone's confidence deflate so quickly. Deborah opened her mouth twice, closed it, and finally said something about needing to consult the board's attorney, before turning around and walking back toward Meadowbrook without another word, her slippers slapping against the gravel the entire way. Inspector Whitfield used a set of bolt cutters from her truck to remove the chain herself, right there on the spot, and handed the pieces to me in a paper bag, for your records, and for whatever civil action you choose to pursue. She informed me that a formal notice of violation would be issued to the HOA board within the week, and that if the obstruction happened again, the county could pursue daily fines against the association, and potentially against Deborah personally, for repeated violations of the Emergency Access Ordinance. I want to tell you that was the end of it, but there's a little more to the story, and it's the part one actually enjoy telling. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Not from Deborah. From the board's attorney, whom, as it turned out, several of the other homeowners had insisted the board finally consult after county code enforcement showed up with a violation notice threatening the entire subdivision's development permit status. The letter was a formal apology, an acknowledgement that the association had no jurisdiction over my property or my gate, and a pledge that the Access Committee, which as far as I can tell had been invented by Deborah entirely on her own authority, would be dissolved immediately. I later learned, through my neighbor Tom, who boards 2 horses with me and who also serves on the county's volunteer fire response roster, that the other Meadowbrook homeowners had been quietly furious with Deborah for months. Turns out several of them had also received strange letters about permit stickers and access fees, and more than one had simply paid the fake fees rather than deal with the confrontation. When the fire marshal's report became public record and county code enforcement's violation notice went out, it didn't take long for those homeowners to realize just how much liability Deborah's personal crusade had exposed their entire community to. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended purely out of curiosity, Deborah Simmons was voted out as board president in a landslide, replaced by a retired schoolteacher named Wanda Price, who, in her very first act as president, sent me a handwritten letter of apology on behalf of the association and personally walked the length of the shared road with me to confirm, in writing, exactly where the true property lines and easement boundaries stood, so nothing like this could ever happen again. Wanda told me afterward that the meeting had been a long time coming. Apparently several homeowners had grown tired of Deborah's fee schedules and threatening letters months before I ever became her primary target, but nobody had wanted to be the one to challenge her directly. It took a county violation notice, addressed to the entire association and carrying the words Development Permit Compliance Review in bold letters, to finally convince the community that one resident's personal grudges had put every single one of their homes at risk. 2 other board members resigned within the month, and the Architectural and Access Committee, which as far as anyone could tell had never actually been approved by a formal vote, was struck from the association's bylaws entirely. I heard through Tom, a few months later, that Deborah had put her house up for sale and moved to a different county altogether, somewhere she apparently believed people would better appreciate her particular style of community leadership. I won't pretend I wasn't a little relieved to see the sign go up at the end of her driveway. As for the $4,000 in fake back road maintenance dues Deborah tried to bill me for, I never paid a cent, obviously, but I did end up donating that exact amount to the Comfort County Volunteer Fire Department, in recognition of Captain Reyes and his crew, who I now understand drive that access road regularly during wildfire season, checking exactly the kind of obstruction Deborah had created without a second thought for anyone's safety but her own sense of authority. My gate still stands today, freshly repainted, hinges oiled, exactly where my grandfather built it in 1971.
No lock.
No chain.
No laminated notices.
Just an open road leading to 42 acres that have never, for one single day, belonged to anyone but my family. I think about that morning a lot, standing there in the dark with my thermos of coffee, waiting for headlights to appear on the gravel road. There's something almost poetic about it. Deborah Simmons spent months trying to convince an entire subdivision that she had authority she never actually held, and in the end, it wasn't a shouting match or a lawsuit that stopped her. It was paperwork. It was patience. It was a retired deputy with bolt cutters, a sharp-eyed attorney who knew exactly where to look, and a county inspector who showed up before the sun did, camera in hand, ready to hold a piece of laminated cardboard accountable to the actual law. If there's a lesson in all this, I think it's a simple one. Authority isn't something you can manufacture with a title, a newsletter, or a padlock. Real authority comes from what's actually written down, recorded, and filed with people who have the power to enforce it. Deborah Simmons had a title. I had a deed, a paper trail, and a county government that, when it mattered most, showed up before sunrise. And honestly, that was more than enough. Every once in a while, I'll drive a new boarder or a first-time visitor up that gravel road, and I'll point out the gate as we pass through it, hinges freshly oiled, swinging open exactly the way it's supposed to. Most people don't think twice about it. It's just a gate. But I know what it took to keep it that way, and I know that somewhere out there, filed away in a county records office, there's a permit history and a violation notice that will make sure no one ever tries something like that again, not on this road, and not on my family's land.